everyone. Oh my gosh, so many people flowing in. That's great. Not intimidating at all. And I guess whilst we wait, we can have a little chat about why I decided to start this live or this page to begin with. So I don't know if you guys have been with me for the entire duration of the page or if you're relatively new, but either way, I started the Science Illustrator as a bit of an accountability page because I wanted to learn how to draw better and how I wanted to get a little bit more practice in terms of learning to communicate my science to the wider public, which was fantastic. I didn't realize that so many people were going to be interested. There's now 45,000-ish people on the page, which is insane. I've definitely never spoken to 45,000 people in real life before, but has been a bit of a journey. I've definitely achieved what I wanted to achieve. I've learned a lot, and now what I want to do is actually use this page to make a bit of a difference. So I want to try and transfer as much knowledge as I possibly can, both on the science side and on the science illustration side, so for fellow scientists. And these lives are kind of a way of doing that. So I want to get a little bit of more contact with the people that follow me. I know that you guys send me tons of DMs and I try to answer however many possible DMs I can, but unfortunately I do miss some. So if you're really, really interested in, getting answers, please join the broadcasting channel, which is in my bio, or, join these lives. I'm going to try and make them once a month so that, if you have impending questions, you can ask me away. I am keeping an eye on the chat, which is why I'm kind of like slightly bent over. So, if you have questions, you can just type them in. All right, so the way that this live is going to work is I'm going to be answering a couple of questions from the Q&A that was in my stories a couple of days ago and yesterday. And then we're going to get started with the type of software I use, and I'm going to guide you through how to draw like a very simple cartoon, which, you might not be interested in, but you can use those skills to actually make science illustration if that's what you're into. The first question that I got from the Q&A was regarding my PhD research, which is great because I can use any possible opportunity to talk about my PhD research. The exact question was, what type of research did you do during your PhD? So I worked on two neurodegenerative diseases called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and frontotemporal dementia, and they are two motor neuron dysfunctions. There are some treatments available for these diseases, which increase the quality of life of the people affected, and you can definitely elongate the life as well. These two diseases, unfortunately, you can't really get a final cure. And the reason why we can't get a final cure is because we don't really fully understand the mechanism. We do know some things about the diseases themselves. So for instance, we know that in the neurons of the patients affected, you got these pathological aggregates, which are formed by proteins and nucleic acids, specifically RNA. And people so far have kind of focused on the protein component in order to develop treatments. But up to a couple of years ago, which is when I started working on my PhD, people started to understand that the RNA component is also quite important. And what I've showed during my PhD, you can actually see in this very little animation that I made a while back, is that if you imagine this as a neuron, you get the formation of these multimolecular RNA conformations, and then you have the protein that kind of binds on top of that, and we think that this is how the pathological aggregate actually does come to form. And we've got some really good evidence for that. I've got a paper published in Nature Communication, so if you're interested in that, feel free to go and have a look. The second question was more on the science illustration. So how did you get started? And this is actually relatively random, so I attended Imperial College London. At some point they decided that they wanted to go paperless for lectures, which means they were not going to provide any printed paper notes, and they gave us this massive discount on getting an iPad and an Apple Pencil to actually take notes on the iPad. And this was great. I took full advantage of that, and in order to start practicing my ability to draw with this pen, which is slightly different from using a real pen, I started just doodling stuff like animals and whatever. And yeah, I decided that I really enjoyed it, continued doing it, and decided to apply that to my science career. It's been a couple minutes now. People seem to have flooded in, which is fantastic. Hello to everyone who's saying hi. But I think we can get started a little bit with the illustration side of this project. I'm going to stop at different points so that if you're trying to draw along or follow along, you can catch up. And I'm going to be answering some more of these Q&A questions as we go. The app that I primarily use for all of my science illustrations, I don't know if you can kind of see the screen very well, is called Procreate, and I've talked about this extensively in tons of captions. This is not an advert, by the way. Sadly, Procreate does not sponsor me in any way or form, but it's a tool that is highly underused in the science community, I think. It does have a little bit more of a freehand kind of approach, so there's not as many templates, but it is, I think, just equally as good. This is what Procreate kind of looks like once you open it. Oops, sorry, it keeps twisting. What you want to do is open a new file, and you've got different screen sizes that you can select from. I usually tend to go with the standard form just because I don't want to think too much about it. And this is what you get out of it, just a basic blank piece of paper. Now, the only important aspects of Procreate that you really need to focus on are, let me try and move my camera a little bit. So are these 4 icons that you see here on the top. So you've got here the brushes, which are exactly what you will be drawing with. Now, very great artists will have prepared, packages of brushes, handmade from them for you. I am not that specialized. I do to use just the standard ones that Procreate gives you, specifically the dry ink one and the technical pen are absolutely my favorite. And you kind of get the same options for your eraser at the same time. And then you get this little panel here, which is composed of layers. So if you're familiar with the microscopy, layers is kind of trying to imagine your drawing. Instead of it being in a 2D space, you've got a 3D space. The Z-axis is your number of layers. But if that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it, because I will also talk you through how to use the layers later. And then you've got this little button here, which is just to select colors. Now, very importantly, in Procreate, you can import color palettes, and there is a couple of tools that I will link later when I upload this to YouTube that will actually allow you to develop some color blind and accessible safe palettes. I think one is called Adobe Color and another one is Color Brewer. And this is very fundamental, especially if you're trying to make some science illustrations which are accessible to everyone, especially for scientific papers, trying to take that into account. But for now, we're just going to work with just a simple black color in order to get started with our drawing. So when I'm trying to start a drawing from scratch, I either try to use my memory or objects that I can see right in front of me, or I take references from Pinterest, which I don't know if you guys know about. I mean, you can use Google Images at the same time. It's not very important, but I really, really love Pinterest. I could spend hours just scrolling through reference. You can select a picture. So I'm going to be drawing a flask. On the top 3 dots here, you can download your image to your local device, and you can then import that on Procreate by, let me zoom on that a little bit, by selecting on this icon over here, insert a photo. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing for my flask. Let me just position that a little bit better. All right. So I've got now my frame, which I can resize and put kind of on the left corner just so that I have it. And as you can see here, this has become a layer. Now, what I want to do is try and understand what the basic shapes of these drawings are so that I can then reproduce them, or a version of that at least, in my cartoon. So I'm going to be adding a new layer here. Pick a brush with a very, very bright color. I tend to use red for my shape tracing a lot. And I'm going to start and trying to look at my flask from a purely geometric viewpoint. Now, there's a million different ways you can draw this. If you want to just freehand draw a flask or a person or anything, that's also completely fine. It's just the way that I find works the best for me. So I can see that there's a bit of a little rectangle here, and I've got maybe 2 trapezi. Here, and then there's a bit of a curvature on the bottom. Again, this is a very simple shape, probably didn't even need the, tracing of the shapes, but you can apply this to very, very complex structures or even people, and I find that works really, really well. So once I've got my basic shape here, by overlaying on top of the original image, I practice some freehand of the same shapes on the side, just to get a little bit warmed up, but at the same time also try and understand whether or not I want to modify these original shapes to make my cartoon more like round shaped or more cartoony like. Also, I should mention, I am aware that some people might be busy and not being able to follow the full 30 minutes of the live, or 35 minutes, whatever this is going to be. That's completely fine. I will be uploading the full version of this, maybe a little bit edited with some added links of things that I will mention, onto my YouTube. So, and the link to my YouTube is in my bio, so feel free to look at that. And then I've got my little round shape at the bottom. So, you know, if we had to summarize, step number 1 would be to understand basic shapes, sorry. And then 2, draw, that's weird, the basic shapes. And so far I'm using the dried brush, but you can pretty much use anything you'd like. As you can see, I've made it a little bit shorter than the original, just because I want my little flask cartoon to be a little bit more, of this shape. So, second step is going on to an additional layer and reduce the opacity of the bottom layer to about a half. And this will allow me to trace without having too many lines confused at the same time. So I'm going to be changing to a black color and be maybe like a little bit more precise on what I want the final shape to be. Now, Procreate does have some assisted drawing to it. So for instance, if you want to draw a circle, but you don't have, Michelangelo's skill, you can also just kind of draw a wonky circle and keep it pressed. And then automatically, this is going to be transformed either into an ellipse or a circle or whatever you prefer. And this happens on Adobe as well, I think. You can do the same for lines, which is what I'm going to be doing here. So you draw a line which is not perfectly straight, but you keep it pressed. And now you can see that I have a perfect line that kind of follows my trajectory. Do that on both sides. I'm going to be drawing an arc in the same way. You can edit it to change the point on how large I want the bottom to be. I just want it to be slightly angled. So this is not perfect, but as a first sketch of the original shape that I want, it's actually exactly where I want it to be. So sketch. Let's call it draft 1 instead. And if you're following along, I'm going to give you maybe a couple of minutes just to get to this point in whichever software you're trying to use, and I'm going to be answering another one of the questions from the Q&A, which is actually, I think, a question that I saw also on the chat as well. Thank you so much for writing that. The question was, what kind of art do you enjoy making the most, or do you have any recent projects that you're working on? I went through a lot of different phases when it came to science art. I was doing some more, I want to call it realistic science art, but not quite, but taking inspiration from the microscopy that I was doing during my PhD. That was actually really fun. But now I've moved towards making more doodles or cartoon-like projects. I like to make short frame rate animations as well. And this is because a lot of the projects that I'm doing are now revolved towards younger audiences, especially children, and that tends to capture the attention a little bit more. So one of the projects that I recently finished, which I think I have here, kind of trying to make a vintage lab book because I wanted to have a pretty lab book with a lot of cheat sheets, and that's exactly what I did. So these are just some of the sketches from the lab book itself. So you can see you've got some vintage image of a microscope. And that project is now completed. You can buy the lab notebook on my Amazon link in bio if you want. If you're just interested in the cheat sheets, they're also freely available on my Instagram. A second project I'm working on at the moment, this was in collaboration with some of my fellow colleagues at the Francis Crick Institute, and what we wanted to do was try and draw as cartoons as many scientists as possible, coming from all different backgrounds, ethnicities, nationalities, and so on and so forth, just to show people, especially children, that anyone can be a scientist and there's no clear-cut definition of what a scientist is. This is one of my friends, Hugh, who I'm very slowly transforming into a cartoon, and you can see here some of the guidelines. So I was trying to understand the basic shapes of him as a human, just like I did for the little flask that I did earlier. As a final project that I'm working on, which I've been working on for God knows how long at this point, but it's a coloring book for children written as Guide to Saving the World, where I explore human biology, going from molecules to cells to humans. So there's kind of like drawings of what a tissue is, what a cell is, and with like little explanations, just so that children hopefully can get interested and become the scientists of tomorrow. And these are all very offline projects, so I'm not showing a lot of it on my social media, but I'm gonna try and get a little bit better with that and show you the process as well. All right, so I think that was about enough time to get to this stage. And at this point, I find that after you have your first draft, that's where you can let your creativity really to take the reins. So I'm going to be creating another layer, and I'm going to start adding some details. So I like this lining here that there is an original flask. I think that's really what screams flask to me. So I'm going to be adding those, maybe with a little bit of numbering. And because this is a cartoon, we will be adding some little arms and legs to it. Now, it's particularly important if you're trying to make a cartoon-like character out of an inanimate object. It's really fundamental that you put all of the human-like features on a different layers in case you want to animate this, and I've learned this the hard way. My little arms, it's just going to be holding onto his waist because I still cannot draw fingers, unfortunately, or hands, despite many years spent doing science cartoons and science illustrations. It's going to be a bit of a perplexed flask. Apologies for that. Yeah, and there you have it. You've got the details. Here. And this is kind of it. For the coloring and the shading and the animation side of it, you can spend about from 2 to 2 million hours trying to do that. But these are really just the basic tools that you need in order to make a really good scientific illustration. Just want to answer maybe a couple more questions from the Q&A. If you've been drawing along with me, feel free to post stories, post and tag me so I can see your work. And honestly, it made me really grateful the fact that you guys could join. So thank you so much for that. Follow-up question was, did you go to Liceo Scientifico? For those of you who don't know, I'm originally from Italy. I spent my first 18 years of my life in a little town near Rome, and I did attend my high school in Italy. So yes, I did go to Liceo Scientifico. So in Italy, you can either pick a science-based high school or more like a high school based on classics or humanities, and I did pick the scientific one because I knew that I was more interested in science, but we still did end up getting a bit of a broad and general type of education. The follow-up question was, did you work in a lab as an undergraduate student? Yes, quite extensively. I went to Imperial College London as an undergraduate, and within the program in itself, there's quite a few hours that are just devoted to lab work. That was already part of my CV, but I also did several internships as I was growing up. So one after first year, second year, and third year. And don't worry if you can't do the internship, you don't have the opportunity, maybe because there's not enough space or your university doesn't offer that. Because I think that in the end, although it was great experience and great exposure to the research life, I didn't learn as much as I thought I would, because keep in mind that research is an incredibly long process, and the 3/4-5 weeks that you're going to be spending in a research lab ultimately are not really going to make much of a difference. It's more for you to get an exposure to those environments. But again, from a CV perspective, it's not that important. I know tons of people that manage to get PhD and master's projects without doing that. And I'm just saying this because I get tons of DMs from people who come from different countries and didn't get the opportunity to do undergraduates in the UK, where maybe getting internships is a little bit more complicated. And don't worry about it. Like, you don't need internships in order to land your dream job. How do you keep up with scientific research? Really good question. I explored several different avenues for this one. Back in the day when Twitter was Twitter, it was great because all of the academics were on Twitter and they would just post their research and you can keep up to date just by following the right people, basically. But then the feed on Twitter wasn't particularly well tailored anymore, so I kind of left that and used Google Alerts. So you can set up Google Alerts on your account with specific keywords of the field that you're working on. So for instance, during my PhD, I was working on G quadruplexes, and that was great because I could just type in G quadruplex, and whenever a paper on G quadruplexes was coming up, I would get a notification. Now I've recently joined Blue Sky, which is the new version of Twitter, which seems like all of the academics have migrated towards. So far it's been great. On Blue Sky, you can, again, not sponsored, I just really like the platform, but you can download packages of people to follow. So if you type in something like chemical biology starter pack, you can follow about 200 people who are the prominent PIs in that field, so you can keep up with their publications. And yeah, this is really, really easy to do. How did you get the grades for a PhD? I didn't have actually particularly fantastic grades for my PhD. Believe it or not, maybe slightly above average in my year. I'm not going to bother you with the numbers because every system is different and I don't want people to do comparisons. But the important thing is being really enthusiastic about a specific field, picking the right supervisor, having chats with people from that lab, and really being updated on the type of work that the lab is doing. And once you do that, and you do need to have decent grades, of course, and somewhat experience of being in the lab under your belt, you can apply to pretty much any place. And with this, I think we've come up to about half an hour of the live. So thank you so much for joining me during the session. I really, really enjoyed it. I hope you took something away from this. If you're wondering about how to draw specific things or how to create specific things, feel free to leave it in the comments on the YouTube when I upload this. I will try my best for the next live to actually have that information in. And with this, I wish you a very, very good Saturday wherever you are in the world. Bye guys.